Good morning. This is all rather upmarket. It's a bit of a shock, actually. I feel very intimidated. Well, a microphone, all this, and but very, very nice to see so many people here. Very nice to see a lot of familiar faces, and but also very nice to see a lot of people for whom it's their first time to come to this meeting. I've written myself a few notes. Susie, who's sitting over there, and I are going to do a bit of a double act on the welcome and introductions. She's going to do all the important bits that really matter, that I would be very likely to either mess up or forget. So the things that really count she'll be talking about. But I wanted to just say a few things. It's amazing to be holding the meeting here. I don't know whether you have noticed this is slightly different to the normal NHS. Some of you may not. If so, I want to know which hospitals you go to. But it's a bit of a shock to see lifts at work and this sort of level of place. So I hope you should really enjoy that. I mean, it is an amazing building. The Welcome Collection is an amazing place, and this is an amazing opportunity, which I have to sort of congratulate Seb on this. I don't know whether people know, he'll be talking a little bit about the project Created Out of Mind, which is a once in a lifetime Welcome Trust Award to find the space. So which is fantastic. So it's great thanks to Welcome Trust, Welcome Collection, and to the Hub. I would like to do a couple of thank yous. Susie's going to do some more introductions in just a moment for people, some of them you may know and some of you don't. But I want it's a huge thank you to the Rare Disease Support Group generally, the people who make this work, Alzheimer's Research UK, and also there are some key people, the many people who've helped, and it's always dangerous to name check anybody, but I particularly like to thank Jeanette and Rachel. So the fact that the meeting runs smoothly will be down to them and to Susie. When it gets messed up, it'll probably be that I have deviated from my instructions, and if you see, I'll get pulled to one side, and then usually that I've messed up in what I'm meant to be doing. But I wanted to say something a little bit about what this meeting is all about, which is that it's your meeting, and in this room there is huge expertise, and I don't mean the people this side of the microphone, or all of you. And the purpose of this meeting, yes, it's about trying to provide information and answer questions that people want, talk about research and updates and what's going on. That's a huge part of its function. But I think the coffee and biscuits have a huge function too. And I think the making links between people and sharing stories and hopefully providing mutual support is probably as important, probably actually more important than the rest of the day. And that does speak to the quality of the biscuits, which I'm trying. But I think that really is important. We also want some feedback, which you can do informally or formally, about what works with these meetings. So please do tell us as you go along about things that we are or not providing. But also, we have an agenda, but that doesn't mean we have to stick to it. So you can be as disruptive as you like, or we can deviate and you can say that we should be doing something else. So there will be an opportunity to ask questions, I think, at a number of points. There's going to be special breakout sessions as well. But I think you should take carte blanche now that we'll try and pick up other questions that if you need to, I've already spoken to you, if there are specific things that don't get answered, we'll try and deal with them in coffee breaks or lunch breaks, or if there are things you don't want to ask publicly, that's also fine too. So beyond that, one of the things I feel that I want to evangelize about here, just for a moment, if you'll forgive me, is that these illnesses have a huge impact upon families, as you all will know, and they can disempower people. People are fully lives can be taken over by the illness. And what I want to try and suggest is that there are groups coming together, you have more power and influence than you think you might have. And I think that you have an opportunity to change how policy works, how services work, and have your voice listened to. And I think if we can support people in that, that's also a way of fighting back against these illnesses, as well as taking part in research and as well as doing all the other things which you do in part of your normal lives of coping with your own situations. There'll be a lot of things that people have in common here, and there'll be everybody's situation is quite different, and so we will try and match the different people's requirements. We've got people here who come from families with frontotemporal dementia, from families with Alzheimer's disease, people who have been affected, are affected in different ways, or are concerned about what the future will hold. So we're a very mixed group, but we'll try and make like this to be as mutually, as the name says, supportive as possible. So, Susie, you've got some important things to say. So I look forward to this day, and we'll try and do a double act.
Thank you, Nick. Okay, so I will keep this brief, as Nick says, just to sort of outline some housekeeping and some introductions for the day. Firstly, could Jeanette and Rachel just stand up if you haven't actually met them and you've only been emailing them? Jeanette is administrating everything, Rachel is at the other end of the phone line and the emails, and they've been really instrumental in making today run smoothly, so thank you to them. And we've got a large team of helpers here from the DRC as well. Anyone with a badge in red is a helper. So even if you don't really know who they are, what their name is, if it looks red and you have a question, grab one of them and I'm sure they'll do their best to help. Another important person who you may have met is Maria, our caterer from the Welcome. Not only does she provide the amazing biscuits, she's a very, very lovely, friendly person. So if you haven't said hi to her, do take that chance over lunch and later on. Yeah, she's volunteered to come in. Is she there? Yeah.
Thank you. See you lunchtime.
And of course, we're lucky to have some clinicians from the National and the DRC here with us. So obviously Nick, Dr. Kath Mummery, Seb and Natalie, who are all variously taking part through the rest of the day. So just to highlight some recent fundraising as well, because it's always lovely to have people who make a lot of effort to raise money for RDS. So Mark Bentley ran the marathon and James Westcott did. I think quite a few people did actually, but these two in particular, we know that they've raised a lot of money and we're very grateful to them for that. James's wife is also running a quiz. You can see the details there. So if that's your neck of the woods and you're not doing anything on the evening of Friday the 26th of May, do take her phone number and we can send that round afterwards as well if that's something you'd be interested in doing. Okay, and finally a plug for our free online course, Many Faces of Dementia. Many of you here I know have done it already. It's a free course you can do over the internet. It takes about 2 hours a week and it's for anybody really, professionals, families, interested people, students. And the first week in particular focuses on what it's like if you have a dementia in your family that's inherited. And so if you've got people who you think would really benefit from learning a bit more about the situation you're in, please pass them the link and encourage them to get online and do it. We've had really, really good feedback and we think it's a lovely way of educating people a bit more really. So we can also send that round afterwards. I'm getting some nods as well. I know there's some people here who've done it and have said it, they found it really helpful. Okay, so on to the agenda for today. We've got Kath Mummery kicking off talking about current trials in familial dementia. And then we're handing back over to Nick of more of a facilitated discussion with any questions and things that you have about trials. And then before lunch we move on to Seb, who's going to talk a bit more about the project that Nick alluded to, which is why we're here today. There's also a lot of artwork around the space, which Seb will talk a lot more about, but you're very welcome to explore that a bit more at lunchtime as well. And then after lunch we're splitting up, and we'll have about 50 minutes just for some discussions, questions, supporting each other about things that are specific to those diagnoses. And then we come back together just before 3 o'clock to close the day. And then really just before I hand over to Kath, just to say that in many ways you're all on a very similar journey, that's why you're all here with us today. But we know also that everybody's journey is different and we don't really know where it's going. And it's our privilege really to try and stand alongside you as best we can and try and help with that if we can. And we very much hope that you take something helpful from today in that regard. Over to Kath.
Just want to echo those words. That's exactly why we're here. It's fantastic to be here. I haven't been to one of these meetings for a few years because I haven't been able to.
Sorry, Pat, can you hold the mic closer? It's not an ideal one. So
Okay.
you need to be really close to it.
Is that better?
Yes.
If I'm going to move, because I do move a lot, so if you can start just tutting at me if you can't hear me, that would be useful. But I will try and keep still. How do I get it up? Okay, brilliant. Almost rude. That's me. All right. So, I'm here, I've been asked to talk to you about trials in familial dementias. And we've got two groups here. So we've got the Familial AD group and we've got the Familial FTD group. And I'm going to try and talk about both of those, but there will be some elements that are about dementia trials in general. I've got some very exciting potential things to tell you about at the end that possibly apply to both groups, but we'll see how we get on. The other thing to say is that if you want to ask questions, please do. Don't wait till the end. If you've got one, just stick your hand up and I'll do my best to answer. The slides are here for information, but if we need to change and talk about something else, that's absolutely fine, okay? So just let me know what you want and I'll do my best to answer. So I started trials about 8 years ago, and at that point there was me and Jane, who was sat here, she's now over there, who is the most efficient nurse on the planet, and if it wasn't for her we wouldn't have had any trials at all. We now have around 20 people involved in clinical trials, and we have this fantastic centre which Nick led the bid to get about £20 million to build, and if we didn't have that we wouldn't be able to do the studies that we're doing, so it's hugely important, and some of the people around here are involved in studies there. And we'll tell you that it doesn't just give us the ability to do very difficult studies and early phase studies, but it also gives us the ability for people involved in studies to get to know each other. They kind of form a family. And we end up having groups in FAD, certainly, that talk to each other and get as much from being within the unit together as they do from being in the trial itself. And I think that's hugely important. Sometimes it feels impossible. Sometimes it feels like this, we're never going to get to the top of this, we're not going to find something that works. But when I feel like that, I think about this person, who's my great-great-great-uncle. Yeah, he's quite impressive. And he climbed this mountain for the first time before anybody else. And in fact, there's a part of it, the route that he climbed, was named after him. So that makes me very proud, but also it makes me think about the level of perseverance he had, the planning he went through, the precision he needed to put in to do that. And if we can take a little bit of that into trials, it stands us in good stead. So I always think about him when I think about what we're going to try and do. Now, it does sound impossible sometimes, but if you think about the things that we think are possible, all we have to do is try and delay things by 5 years. If we do that, that's a huge improvement for a lot of people. It's a beginning. It's a step along the way to find something that makes a big difference. And that is an achievable aim. That's something that we can do, hopefully, relatively soon. So I think thinking about the totality sometimes feels very difficult, and thinking about steps along the way is very important. We haven't got a breakthrough yet. Trials have been happening for a long time, but I think there are good reasons for that, and I think thinking about the populations that have genetic diseases and how we can do things in them will help us develop breakthroughs in the diseases in general. So it's not for want of activity. There's a lot of studies going on in dementia in general. So this map shows you all the trials open right now in the world. So that's a lot. And that's a lot more than it was only a few years ago, which is very encouraging. Studies haven't worked so far, and this is not in genetic disease, this is in sporadic disease, perhaps because we haven't been choosing patients carefully enough. In other words, the diagnosis may not have been as accurate as we would have liked it in the past. We need to have really good ways of looking at what we're doing in the study, measuring the effect it has on someone. We need to be giving the drugs at the right time, or we need to be trying to give them as early as possible. And we need to make sure our studies are designed right. So these are things that we've learned over the past 20 years, and we do much better now. And just thinking about Alzheimer's disease, if we think about what we want to try and treat, especially in familial Alzheimer's disease, we know that amyloid drives the problem. We know that genetic abnormalities cause an increase in the build-up of amyloid, and that's the primary problem. It's a very good question. Not in familial. If we think about just the general population, people weren't terribly precise about their diagnoses 20 years ago. They'd say, you've got dementia. And that could include a lot of different problems. And so when we look at some of the studies, and we look back at people in those studies, some of them that were put into a study for Alzheimer's didn't actually have Alzheimer's pathology when they looked later. So that was a big reason for some of those studies being negative. And the thing about a genetic population is that clearly that's very different. You have a very clear cause for what's going to happen. And so you can target that, and you can be much more confident that you know what you're treating. Does that answer your question? So thinking about Alzheimer's for starters, and thinking about trying to treat amyloid. So we need to try and either remove it or prevent it building up. And a lot of the work has come from this study, which was done in mice a long time ago. Basically, what this man found, Schenk, was that if you give a vaccine against amyloid to mice, one simple injection, you can stop the amyloid. So this red stuff here is the abnormal amyloid, and you can get rid of it. Not only that, but if you get rid of it, the mice learn, yeah, and the green is normal. The mice learn, and I'm going to take this off here, because I'm going to move. So the mice learn the same way as normals learn, which is amazing. So this one simple vaccination showed huge differences in mice, which people then got very focused on in terms of what would happen in humans. And so immunotherapy was then the main focus for studies in Alzheimer's disease. Do you know what immunotherapy is? Okay, so if you imagine your immune system is the thing that targets things like a virus that attacks you or a bug that attacks you. You develop antibodies that target that thing and get rid of it. And essentially, immunotherapy is doing the same sort of thing. So what it does is, in that vaccine case, you give a vaccine that is like the thing you want to target. It makes your body produce antibodies, and that then attaches to the abnormal protein, the sticky protein, the amyloid, and wipes it out. So that's the aim of immunotherapy, and you can either do it that way by a vaccine, or you can give the antibodies themselves. You can make them, and they then attack the amyloid and wipe it out. You need to keep making it. That's the difficulty, exactly. So if you don't get given a vaccine that helps you produce it longer, and you get given the antibodies, in this case, themselves, so you're not making them, you need to be given them on a regular basis. You're exactly right. So that's the difference between the two things. The other thing is that the vaccination can potentially cause you to have different immune responses, so it can have side effects. So this is the way that people have been targeted for a long time. And a lot of you will know the name of this drug. This was something that in summer 2015 was pronounced as the cure for Alzheimer's. Now, that was because there had been positive results from an early study. And there were then bigger studies, some of which are still ongoing. One of those bigger studies was in a mild Alzheimer's disease group, so people that were affected. And unfortunately, although it showed some effect, it didn't show as much effect in that group as we were hoping for, which is disappointing. But then you learn from these things, and what we saw was that there were some effects. They weren't reaching significance. The question was why. The consensus is the dose is too low, and it's being given in people that are already affected, and we should be giving it to people before then. So this leads me to the Diane study, which is a study that many of you may well know about, some of you will have been in, which is looking to see how you recognise the changes in someone, what those changes are, way before they ever get symptoms. If you know that they've got a genetic problem, you can look at them and predict when they're going to get symptoms, so see what happens in their bodies way before they get symptoms. And what this has shown is that we can see changes 15, 20 years before people get any symptoms at all, which is really important when you think about you're trying to give treatments early. So what this means is these drugs that we've been giving that haven't been working, we've been using down here, where people are too affected. Studies in the past have been giving drugs too late, we think. So what we want to try and do is give them earlier, and we want to use markers that show the changes before they start to get dementia. Okay? So we're trying to move the studies this way. And one of the studies that's doing that is the DIAN-TU study, which is the study I'm a chief investigator in the UK, and Nick is very closely involved, as is everybody here actually. And this is with people that can be before symptoms, that are at risk of familial Alzheimer's disease. They don't have to know that they've got a mutation, they just have to know that it's in their family, which is really important. And this has now been going on, this study, for some number of years. It's been incredibly successful, as much because of the group and the community that it's formed, in terms of the people not only within the UK, but also internationally. So there was a conference last year for people that were involved in Diane. There'll be another meeting at the conference in London this year, and it gives people a huge amount of support. It also is looking at specifically 2 immunotherapy drugs. So drugs like I told you, these are antibodies that attack the abnormal protein and try and clear it from your body. And there are 2 of these. I won't dwell on this, but basically this is what I've just said, that you don't need to know that you've got a mutation to go into the study, which means for a lot of people that's something that's very important. They don't want to know that they've got it. These studies are really quite a lot of time commitment to go into. So this study, people have a week where they virtually live at the hospital. You come in, you have PET scans, MRI scans, lumbar punctures, cognitive tests. It's a lot to ask somebody to do. They do that every year for 4 years. But there'll also be monthly visits for infusions. And I have to say it's testament to the people that come and do the study, but also to our nursing staff that run that unit, that it's seen as a very positive experience for the people that are involved, which I think is fantastic, and we do our best to continue that. We also have amazing help from people like Susie in terms of psychological support when things do get a bit tough, which is hugely important in the way these studies run. And in spite of how much time this takes, people that are 35 to 45 have full-time jobs, come from Holland, Ireland, Germany, as well as the UK, to do these studies, which is extraordinary. So this study, as I said, has gone really well. The only time people have stopped has been because they've been unable to carry on because their disease has got worse, unfortunately. One guy who got his golden ticket job, and he couldn't say no to that. So obviously you've got to do that. The study is continuing to develop, so there will be a third treatment arm added to this soon, and we will be recruiting to that treatment arm. And that's going to be in the next few months. That is essentially what this slide is showing, is the two existing arms. Started off as 2 years, and they've been extended to 4 years. And obviously what will happen is there'll be analysis at an interim point to ensure that we're seeing that the drug's potentially still having benefit, and then that continues. If you show a drug is absolutely not going to show any benefit at an interim analysis, you stop when you look at another drug. But that's where we're going at the moment. These two are both having their doses escalated because of the conversations I was telling you about before. So the studies develop depending on the information we have. We then are adding in extra drug arms depending on what's looking most promising in the literature and in the studies so far. So the next one that's being added in is arm 3. It's going to be starting soon, possibly not June, it may be a couple more months. So what happens is, in this study, it's quite a complex setup. So 2 drugs being tried at the same time. You come in and you're randomized into one of the arms. So you know which arm you go into, but then within that arm, you either get drug or placebo. Yeah? So yes, so this will be starting soon. It will be very similar to the setup that I showed you in terms of 4 years and monthly visits, but it's an oral drug instead. And as I said, we'll be recruiting to that in the next few months. Just lessons from this, working together in this study with pharma and not being led by the drug companies has been really important. The study has a huge amount of input from Familial AD groups, which I think is incredibly important in working out that we're doing the right things and trying to do the right things on an ongoing basis. There are regular webinars that people get involved in and have input into what we're doing. The trial is adapted depending on what results are coming out. And I think this is really important in terms of being able to get people into the studies. You don't have to know whether you've got a mutation or not. You do not necessarily have symptoms to go into the study. You can be minus 15 years before when your predicted age is. And so we hope this is going to be early enough that we're going to be seeing effects with these where we weren't seeing in the earlier studies. Just in terms of FTD, and Nick, I'm aware I've been taking questions, so I'm probably over my time. How am I doing?
You're fun.
Good. Shout when I've run out.
I'll shout.
Okay, so turning to FTD, and I realised that this is way behind Alzheimer's disease in the amount of trials work that's happened so far. You saw that map at the beginning that showed the world and activity. Almost all of that was in Alzheimer's. There's very little, although it's increasing, in FTD. It's way behind, but we're trying to catch up. And one of the big things that's going to be happening is the GenFi platform, which is a multinational platform set up by John Rohrer, who we work with, will be setting up clinical trials within it. So that is very exciting and is in discussion about various studies. So this was one study that's been done in hereditary forms of FTD. And the aim was, in progranular mutation FTD, to try and treat the abnormality. And the abnormality is that you have a mutation in the gene that causes progranulin protein, which means you get less progranulin, which causes problems with the nerve cells. And so what we wanted to do was try and normalize that by finding a drug that helped enhance the production of that protein. And the drug company involved found a particular drug, which is an HDAC inhibitor, so essentially that enhances the transcription of the protein, makes you have more protein, and the results before clinical trials looked very promising. The study itself was a safety study, and what we found was that in this study, we needed to get people in that knew their status. And we had some concerns about that when the study was set up, but it had been set up in that way, so we couldn't change it. The study itself, this is a typical drug trial, or a short drug trial. What happens is, you come in for screening, which involves psychological tests, it might involve a lumbar puncture, it might involve a PET study. You then have a period of time where you're monitored while you're taking the drug, and that might be, in this case, it's only a month. In studies like Diane, it's 4 years, so they can be very different. This is an early study, so it's a safety study, they tend to be shorter. And then you have further tests at the end, which are to ensure that the drug is safe and that it's got to where it needs to get. In early studies, you do that with a low dose first of all. You make sure it's safe. Oops. What do I do? I bored the computer to sleep. Yeah, that's it. It's totally off. So basically, you check it's safe, and if it's safe, you do it at a higher dose, and you might do that more than twice. And the point of that is to make sure that it's safe and it's doing the right things, and that was the aim with this drug. Now, the study itself went well with the people that went into it, but the main problem was that nobody wanted to know their genetic status quite reasonably. So these were all people that were interested in trials, but they did not want to know, so they weren't going to go into the study, which entirely fair enough. There are a couple of other people that then didn't meet criteria. It's very difficult sometimes to recruit into studies. That's not because people don't want to go into them. It's because the studies have been made so difficult to get people into because of the criteria. And that can be very frustrating as somebody that wants to go into studies, as much as it is for us trying to help people get into studies. Sometimes they're too prescriptive. And I think that was the case here. So actually, globally, it was really difficult to get people into the study. And Jeanette just asked me why this was blank. She thought that she'd done something to my slides, which she hadn't at all. This is my slide. And the problem with some studies is that we don't have results on this study because the company ended up stopping. The drug hopefully will be taken up by another company, but at the moment there is a pause on that, and we don't have results, which is very frustrating for everybody concerned. I'm hoping that that will change. I'm going to move quickly on to some positives. Now, I showed you a mountain before. This isn't quite that mountain, but we are, I think, at least somewhere in the foothills. We are much better than we were a few years ago. We have much more funding, we have much more expertise, we have amazing people like you that are really keen to get involved in these studies, and we have a much better understanding of what makes them work. There are new possibilities coming up. So we know that in some forms of FTD, tau is the major problem. We know that in AD, tau is a significant pathology in addition to the amyloid. So a type of protein again, but a different type of protein to amyloid. And so people have started looking at trying to treat with immunotherapy again. The tau, what happens if you try and wipe that out? Does it stop the process? Very early days. There are several early phase studies. This one is the first published that's shown it seems to be safe, and it seems to have a good reaction. And so that will then go on to later phase studies, potentially in FTD, potentially in AD. And so it's a case of watch this space. But there are several in this sort of early phase at the moment. This, I think, is one of the most exciting things that's happened recently in trials. And this is potentially for both AD and some forms of FTD. So antisense oligonucleotides is a bit of a mouthful. All it means, so this is your genetic makeup up here. This is your DNA. And each gene, when it wants to make the protein it codes for, a message is transcribed from that gene. So this is your message, your mRNA. And that message is then translated by the cell machinery into the protein. So when it's gone wrong and there's a mutation in that gene, the message has gone wrong, the protein has gone wrong. So what antisense does is makes a small fragment that's like the message, binds onto the message, stops the message being translated. If you stop the message being translated, you don't get the protein. So it's really precise, and it means that you get a lot less of the effects that you can get from targeting protein. The only problem with some of these is that you do have to have them via a lumbar puncture. It's not for everybody, and there are delivery methods that will be looked at in the future, but that is the way that you have to get it into the nervous system, because it doesn't get there otherwise at the minute. But so far, it's very safe. No. So this treatment is being given at the minute in several different groups. And what happens is you have a lumbar puncture and you have the infusion at the time of the lumbar puncture, and at the minute it looks like we're going to need to do that every few months. Now obviously you don't want to have a treatment every few months for however long. So for the studies that's happening, but they're looking at how that might be improved on. But you're right, it's not just a one-off. So yeah, not for everybody. Having said that, they're really good at lumbar punctures. But what I would say is it depends if there's a treatment. So there's a Huntington's disease group at the minute that works in the same unit as us, and they're doing this. And the individuals that have gone on to that study have just all signed up to the extension study to continue it for at least a year, because they feel it's such a potentially good treatment. I think it's all about weighing up the pros and cons. Yeah. So it's being used in several groups, and so far seems to be very safe in those groups. So I just want to show you one last thing and then I'm done. There's a potential benefit of this. We're about to start a study using the equivalent in Alzheimer's disease, and we will see how that goes. But it's also, there are plans for it to be used in MAPT mutation FTD, and not yet, but there are discussions about this sort of thing being used for C9orf. There are also plans in MAPT considering looking at the vaccines I showed you just now against tau, and about passive as well as active immunotherapies. So there are things happening in the future, and there are lots of discussions that I think are very exciting. So just in conclusion, I think we're making progress. I think the work that we do with the genetic groups it's really pioneering at the forefront of trials. It's going to help, these diseases are not as common as sporadic Alzheimer's disease, but they are going to inform us, hopefully, about that as well as treating ourselves. And so the other thing is, you saw the difficulty with the second study when people needed to know their genetic mutation. It's so important that we involve people and that you get involved in how we design studies and in how we run them. These things, I think, you already all know about. We've just talked about them. I think in the future we'll be thinking about combination therapies. And I just want to say thank you to everybody that's involved in the studies. There's an awful lot of people that are involved from the point of view of our end, but most importantly, patients and participants and families that we wouldn't be able to do any of this without. So thank you very much.